Hi, I hope you're enjoying Masterpiece. This is Mrs. Moore. I'm going to be reading chapters 21 and 22. More than a copy. When they were gone, James immediately tugged back his jacket cuff looking for Marvin. When he didn't see him, he checked under his collar. "There you are, little guy," he said, relieved. "Do you think you can do it? The real drawing is right here. Look at it." He plucked Marvin from his nylon perch and gingerly lowered him to the table. Marvin crawled over to the frame, climbing onto the glass of the original. He memorized the way the two figures leaned into each other, the shape they made on the page. He remembered what Carl and Christina had said of his earlier drawing. Then the image was too squashed. He would do better this time. "Did you hear what Christina said about that guy?" Durer? James asked. "All that stuff about the way he drew? Maybe that'll help you make your picture look more like his, you know?" He shook the jar of ink, then unscrewed the cap and set it down next to the blank paper. Inside was a glossy mud-colored puddle, shot through with glints of reddish gold. Marvin took a deep breath. He crept to the edge of the cap. He plunged his front legs into the ink, then slowly backed over the manuscript page and began to draw. It felt as if time stopped. Marvin was so focused on the work that he lost the sense of everything around him, including James. The walls of the room seemed to disappear. The table floated away. There was only the page, and the ink, and fortitude. He worked quickly, making fluid, delicate strokes. The girl took shape before him with her strong back, her muscular arms. The lion collided with her in a sinewy, angry mass. Marvin moved back and forth between the original and his own drawing, checking proportions and scrutinizing the smallest details: the lace trim of the girl's gown, the plume of the lion's tail, the center of the paper blossomed in a dense cross-hatching of fine brown lines. James said nothing, watching wide-eyed from inches away. Marvin drew and drew. His eyes burned from concentrating on the drawing. His legs ached. "It's been an hour," James whispered at one point. "They'll be back soon." Finally exhausted, Marvin wiped off his front feet and collapsed on the edge of the paper to survey his work. "Oh," James gasped. His face split in a huge, wondering grin. "You did it!" Marvin looked at the drawing. It was tiny and beautiful, bursting with energy and life. In every contour, in the least of its details, it was fortitude. He knew in his heart that he could do no better. He hoped it would be good enough. There was a quiet knock at the door. "James!" They heard Christina in the hallway. James looked questioningly at Marvin. Marvin ran across the table and onto James's wrist, ducking under his sleeve. I'm finished," James called. Christina, Denny, and Carl filed slowly into the room. They walked silently to the table and surrounded James, staring at Marvin's drawing. For a moment the room was so still it seemed frozen. Christina spoke first. "Do you know what Durer said?" she asked, and Marvin could hear the emotion in her voice. "The treasure secretly gathered in your heart will become evident through your creative work." She paused. "This drawing is beautiful, James. It's more than a copy. You made it Durer's, but also your own." Beneath the jacket cuff, Marvin shuddered with joy. "It's amazing," Denny said, shaking his head. "Truly amazing! I wouldn't have believed it was even possible if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." "You hear that, buddy?" Carl threw back his head and laughed, as if happiness were bubbling up inside of him and forcing its way out. "You're wowing the experts now. I'd call this a masterpiece." James blushed a deep bright pink, biting his lip. He turned to Christina. "Do you think other people will believe it's the real thing?" he asked. "I don't think so," Christina said firmly. "I know so." So what do we do now? Carl asked. You don't do anything, Christina said, smiling at him. But I have a great deal to do. I have to arrange for a burglary. Carl's eyes twinkled at James. Something tells me a masterpiece is about to be stolen. Chapter 22. The fight. Christina said it would take at least a week to work out the details of the burglary. She cleared her plans with the museum's director, the FBI's Stolen Art Unit, and the New York City Police. That took some convincing, I can tell you, she said. But there were still certain details to be resolved. Denny was working on getting clearance from the Getty, even though the real Fortitude wouldn't be at risk. Nothing will happen until next week at the earliest, Christina told James as he and Carl prepared to leave. Marvin looked longingly at his finished drawing. What if he never saw it again? James appeared to be thinking the same thing. He turned to Carl and tugged his father's shirt. What if something goes wrong? We never get it back, he asked. Carl looked at Christina. Well, there's always that danger, she said soberly. She crouched next to James and took his hand. Her slender fingers were so close to Marvin that he could have reached out to touch one. Christina had beautiful hands, he thought, graceful but competent, the kind that seemed equally capable of painting a picture or wielding a hammer. I'm sorry, James. I wish I could promise that your drawing will be safe, but I can't. James was quiet for a minute. Then I want to come back and see it one more time, he said finally. Marvin felt a wave of relief. Maybe he wouldn't have to say goodbye to Fortitude just yet. Denny looked at James in surprise, but Christina nodded understandingly. Of course. It'll be here in my office till next week. Why don't you come on Thursday or Friday? Can we, Dad? Please? Carl hesitated. I'll have to ask your mother, James. It's fine with me, but I don't know what her plans are. James bit his lip anxiously. I hope we can come. When they returned to the Pompiday's apartment, Mr. Pompiday swung open the door before they could even knock. Carl, he said, stiffly nodding, then beckoned James inside. Your mother's waiting for you. She has something to tell you. His voice crackled with excitement, which was such an unusual tone for Mr. Pompiday that Marvin emerged from James' coat sleeve, wondering what could possibly have happened. Oh, James, said, looking confused. Dad wanted to ask her. I'm going to try that again. Oh, James said, looking confused. Dad wanted to ask her. Carl shook his head at James slightly. Another time, buddy. I'll call her tomorrow. He bent and pulled James against him, kissing him warmly. You did a great job today. A great job. Thanks, said James shyly. Carl took the pen case out from under his arm and lifted the lid. I'll just clean off that brown ink for you. He unseated the pen from its nesting place and stopped. Marvin froze. There was no brown ink on the pen, of course. The pen had never even been dipped in Christina's jar of ink. Why hadn't they thought of that? Marvin groaned inside. It would have been so easy to do. Instead, that silver nib was shiningly free of ink from Christina's meticulous cleaning hours earlier. That's okay, James said quickly, grabbing the pen from Carl. Already cleaned it off. Carl looked at him strangely. But how? When we were at the museum, James said. He shoved the pen back in the box and slapped down the lid. Mr. Pompiday muttered impatiently. Well, if that's it, Carl, we'll say good night. James's mother. Sure, said Carl, studying James with a questioning expression on his face. I'll talk to you tomorrow, James. He started to back away, then said quietly, "Love you, buddy." "I love you too, Dad," James answered, not looking up. Mr. Pompaday closed the door with a thud and herded James toward the living room. There, in the soft glow of the lamplight, Mrs. Pompaday was perched on a chair near the mahogany card table, with Marvin's first drawing, the little street scene, carefully positioned in front of her. "Oh, finally, you're back," she cried, clapping her hands like cymbals. "James, the most wonderful thing! I invited the Mortons over today to see your cunning little drawing, and what do you think? They want to buy it." James' eyes widened. "Really?" he asked. She rushed forward and grabbed James' arm, pulling him to the table. "How much do you think they'll pay, James? How much?" "But you won't sell it, right?" Marvin thought. "I made that for you." James stared at the drawing. "They'll pay money for it?" "I did tell them I'd have to check with you. But James, this could be your first sale as an artist. A real artist. Think of that." "You'll be making more than that father of yours in no time," Mr. Pompaday added, chuckling. "Never thought of art as a lucrative profession myself, but you just may be on to something with these little pictures of yours." Marvin crept forward, trying to see James's face. It was a birthday present, he thought. James blushed, his eyes reflecting his parents' eager joy. "How much?" he asked. "Oh, I want you to guess," his mother crowed. "No, never mind. You'll never be able to guess. It's too much. $4,000. She clapped her hands again, and James' shocked expression. I know. I would never have put such a price on it myself, but it turns out they've been looking for a miniature for their downstairs powder room, and this is perfect." "For their powder room?" Marvin turned to James in disbelief. "Say no," he thought. "Say you won't sell it." But James smiled a wide, slow smile of amazement and said, $4,000? That's awesome! Nobody at school will ever believe it." "Then I'll tell them yes." When James nodded, Mrs. Pompaday snatched him against her in a bracelet-jangling hug. "Oh, James, I'm so proud of you. Look what you've made of yourself." Marvin inched back under James's jacket cuff in disgust. Humans. Money was the only thing that mattered to them. Not beauty, not friendship. Through the dense fabric, he could hear the Pompaday's muffled voices. Mr. Pompaday still chortling over the Morton's offer. Mrs. Pompaday now urging James to take off his jacket and come to the kitchen for supper. "I have to put my stuff away," James said. He walked down the hall to his bedroom, closing the door behind him. Immediately, he peeled off his jacket and searched his arms for Marvin. Marvin couldn't bear to look at him. As soon as James lifted his wrist, Marvin crawled to the underside. When James turned his arm over, Marvin crawled to the other side again, out of sight. "What's wrong with you?" James asked. "Do you want to get down?" He rested his hand on the desktop, and Marvin immediately scurried across it, heading toward the wall. "Hey, where you going, little guy?" James dropped his hand in front of Marvin, blocking the way. "Do you need to go home? I can take you. Like I did last time. It'll be much faster. Climb up." Furious, Marvin veered around the boy's outstretched palm and continued toward the wall. He wanted nothing to do with James. "What is it?" James persisted. "What's the matter?" This time he settled his hand gently over Marvin and scooped him up. Bringing him close up to his face, he looked at him with troubled gray eyes. By now, Marvin was seething, not just at James's heartless sale of his drawing, but at the indignity of being so easily thwarted when he was trying to leave in a huff. He turned his rear end toward James, gathered his legs beneath him, and sank into a small, immobile black mound. This play-dead maneuver was a common beetle strategy in the face of imminent danger. Marvin had never used it before to show his anger, but he was beginning to realize that communication with humans required a large amount of creativity. "You're mad at me," James said. Marvin didn't move. "But why?" James seemed genuinely bewildered. "Everything was fine at the museum. You were so great. You were so amazing. The way you copied that drawing. You're like a genius, Beetle. Do you know that?" Marvin was determined not to respond. "What's the matter?" James coaxed. He was quiet for a minute. "It's your street drawing, isn't it? You don't want me to sell it." He let out a long breath and flopped into his chair at his desk. "I don't want to sell it either," he said softly. Marvin remained in a little tight huddle, trying not to listen. "You know that, right?" James persisted. "I love that picture that you made for me. That was my best birthday present ever." He sighed. "It's just, you probably can't understand this, but my mom, she's..." James set Marvin down at the desktop, lightly rolling him off his palm. "You can go if you want. I didn't mean to stop you." Marvin slowly uncurled his legs, but stayed where he was. James kept talking. "The thing is, she's so proud of me, you know. That's how she is. That's not how she is, usually. And it's not even for something that I even did. It's for something you did." He crossed his arms on the desk and rested his head on them, his pale face close to Marvin, his breath warm and slightly salty. "It's like this is a special trick that she can show off to all her friends. I wish," he hesitated, "I'd wish she'd be proud of me. For the regular reasons, you know." Marvin turned to face him. He thought of Mama and Papa, who were always ridiculously proud of him, even for things that didn't warrant it. It was like being followed around by your own personal cheering section. Sometimes it bothered him, but mostly it was pretty nice to know that his parents wholeheartedly believed he could do anything, yet were still bursting with pride when he did. He wondered if James had ever felt that way. James kept talking, his voice husky and low. "They said it wasn't my fault that they got divorced. They said that over and over. It's not your fault. We still love you. You're the most important thing to us. But if I was the most important thing, how come I wasn't important enough for them to stay together?" He watched Marvin and waited, as if he thought Marvin might really know the answer. Finally he said, "Because if they'd ever asked me, 'What do you want?' that's what I would have said. All of us together." Marvin crawled to the edge of James's elbow and looked up at him, not feeling angry anymore. He sighed. He saw that he would have to forgive James for the drawing. There were too many other things between them. James let out another long breath. But you know what? If they hadn't gotten divorced, there'd be no William. So William was the one good thing that came out of it. Marvin recoiled in surprise. The Beetle all thought William was quite horrible, grabby, irrational, and dangerous. He knew that James didn't feel that way, but he hadn't ever imagined that James would see William as a blessing. However shocking, it was somehow comforting to hear that that pesky little baby had brought a spark of pleasure to James's life. James sat up and rubbed his face. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," he said sheepishly. "I just like talking to you, I guess." He grinned. "And I know you won't tell anyone." He stretched out his hand again. "Come on, I'll take you home." Marvin climbed onto the boy's finger, and James headed for the kitchen. That night, after the fuss over his return, a full report of what had happened at the museum, and a stern scolding from Mama about the risk he'd taken when he disobeyed her, Marvin lay in his bed, thinking about what James had said. Eventually, he called to his mother. "What is it, darling? Your father and I are about to go foraging." "I can't sleep," Marvin said. "Well, I'm not surprised. You are completely off schedule from living on human time these past few days. But you must be exhausted from your outing. What's the matter?" "I don't know. I was thinking about something James said." Mama sat on the edge of a cotton ball and stroked his shell. "What?" she asked. "About his parents getting divorced." Marvin thought back to the conversation in James's bedroom. Why don't beetles ever get divorced? His mother considered that for a moment. "Well, our lives are short, darling. What would be the point? We have so little time. We must spend it as happily as possible." She tucked the cotton fluff more securely around Marvin. "And we expect a lot less than people do. If we get through the day without getting stepped on, with just a little food to fill our bellies, a safe place to bed down for a few hours, and our family and friends close by, well, that's a good day, isn't it? In fact, a perfect day. Who could ask for more?" Marvin snuggled into the soft bedding and nodded sheepishly. "I guess," he said. "Also, we have no lawyers," his mother added, leaving the room.